Morning, everyone. Wonderful privilege, as always, to be gathered here together in community this beautiful, beautiful spring morning. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Jackie, for your gifts, Betsy, for your gifts, and each person gathered here on either side of the river and either inside the church building or inside the real temple that dwells in each and every one of us. This morning, I'm excited to share the fact that all week I kept thinking that, since people were excited to be together in person, and since there may be a festive spirit around all of you, that maybe I wouldn't do a talk at all. That's just a fleeting thought because, as some of you know, early in the week, something I called grist for my message mill started coming through as early as Monday night and Tuesday. And it was funny because I used that expression last night about, the grist for my personal mill and how I ask that be a blessing wherever I go. And a dear, dear friend that I shared that with said, "What was that expression you just used?" And I said, grist for my mill. They said, okay, all right. So I guess what I would like most to do with you this morning is to learn in front of you, because we know that the person that shows up on the platform or at the podium, in my experience, personal and otherwise, is actually the person that's doing the most learning and just gets to do it in front of everybody who holds her up. So thank you in advance for that. Goodness, I mentioned in our opening prayer that there is a Psalm 77, verse 6, which has inspired me all week as I put the grist through the mill. And I suppose because one of my gifts is a deep, deep sensitivity to and love of language, I noticed that the King James Version I barely understand. And then most of you in my spiritual community know that Jesus's language, Aramaic, which is translated by a person whose first language is Aramaic, George Lamza, is interestingly enough the translation that I seem to understand best. And so let me open our time together this morning by first reading the King James Version, which is Psalm 77, approximately verse 7 to 10 or 11. And here's what it sounds like. And it's verse 6, the first verse, which has the interesting invitation to all of us to take it into our own spiritual journey for understanding and expansion. And it reads, I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with my own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. So for those of you who do not have scripture nearby, I will read it one more time. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with my own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. My spirit made diligent search. Oh boy, and here is Jesus's language in the Lamza Bible translated, and it reads, I meditated far into the night. I communed with my own heart. I have examined my soul and said, has the Lord forsaken me forever? And will he be favorable no more? Is his mercy gone forever? Does his promise fail forevermore? Has God forgotten to be gracious? And so on in a series of rhetorical questions. But what I call our attention back to is the very deep contrast between whatever was going on, and I know some of what was going on during the translation by King James in his England culture, time, and setting, versus George Lomza, who was passed into the light when he sat down and fought a lot of Orthodox pressure to leave the Bible alone and not decide to bring the Aramaic translation. It is his translation which informs my message this morning, the message, correction. And so before beginning with that particular verse, I would like to give 4 or 5 other scripture references which came up for me this week and which may or may not seep into our journey through understanding the soul, through understanding what letting go has to do with understanding the soul. And of course, always in our unity practice, finding a practical way to revere the soul and find it sacred that involves letting go. And so these are based on the grist for the mill, the other scriptures that have blessed me and which I leave with you for the week. From Matthew 23:9, call no man your father. Call no man your father. From Matthew 12:46, who is my mother and brother? From Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom, for all else will be added unto you. So those 3, along with the psalm, which we'll be delving into in some depth, call no man your father, who is my mother and brother, and seek first the kingdom. I could not leave those 3 with you without recognizing that this community is a rich tapestry of people who have been studying unity principles as well as truth as they understand it for a very long time, longer than I have, and I bow to those of you in the community who have. As well, it represents a handful of others who have found this particular interpretation of life, of the journey of spiritual growth relatively recently. And so I will mention 2 scriptures which old school unity types will recognize come up most often in unity teachings. We hear them over and over, and the teacher in me becomes somewhat concerned that in hearing them tossed about in so many unity messages, that they may, as with anything that becomes overworked, be in peril of losing their profound meaning and invitation. And here are the last 2 from Romans 12:2. This is a scripture that informs one of Unity's foundational teachings, principles, tenets, and it is, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Sometimes it reads, by the renewal of your mind. That's Romans 12:2. And so we recognize that scripture, be transformed by the renewing or the renewal of your mind, is a light motif that weaves its way not only in and out of so many of our beliefs, teachings and applications of truth, but also it is reflected in one of our 5 basic tenets. Betsy mentioned in her introduction, there is only one power and one presence in the universe, God the good, omnipotent, and we often add, and in my life. This one, be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind, shows up in the principle that says, thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. I read and hear in that unity teaching a recognition that the only way that our soul can express its oneness with God is for us to begin by accepting 100% responsibility for everything that shows up in our lives. And it is only by renewing and transforming what we're thinking and feeling that we can consider our soul sacred and reconnect with the oneness that is the truth. So the final scripture that we often hear in unity is taken from 2 Corinthians verses 5-7. For we walk by faith, not by sight. Because we know in our humanness that if we are not believing the many words that we repeat, and if we do not imbue them with the power of our faith, that we will not have the renewal in our minds. So let me come back now to what little I have managed to understand about Psalm 77, verse 6 only, and how it might connect to the message that I needed this week and that I always trust Spirit is moving in and through me for that same message to be a blessing for our community. And so Psalm 77, once again, verse 6, for me relates specifically to the process of letting go. It does. I hope that the connection can become evident, helpful, and applicable. Here it is. Psalm 77 verse 6 reads in the George Lambsa translation, I meditated far into the night. I communed with my own heart, and I have examined my soul. Well, the first thing that comes up for me is whether that is true or not. So I invite you to ask yourself this moment, this question, in the sacred silence of your own soul. Have I indeed meditated far into the night? Interpret that far into the night any way that you wish, certainly. For me, it speaks of the transcendence of my spiritual practice to dispel darkness, right? I have meditated far into the night because when I do on a consistent, regular basis, the night is dispelled. The darkness dissipates. Then the psalmist sings, I communed with my own heart. Have I? Have I truly listened to my heart, or am I busy creating distractions, temptations, seductions? Am I Velcroing myself to stuff? And you'll hear about what I have been Velcroed to recently. I have meditated far into the night. Have I? I communed with my own heart. Have I honored my feelings, watched them, embraced them, allowed them? And finally, I have examined my soul. I have examined my soul. Reverence for the life that is our soul is all encompassing. To have this reverence for our souls is to recognize that all of life is contained in that soul. All oneness dwells there. Aha. All oneness dwells in my soul. It's been at least a few months now that one of my regular prayer partner friends shared with me from her lifetime of unity practices that her current prayer has been simply a command to her soul. And so I joined her in that command, recognizing that that is where the oneness awaits me. And that prayer is simply open up, open up, open up my soul to God. Take a minute and breathe that invitation in. Open up, open up, open up my soul to God. Yes, if I believe that meditating far into the night will dissipate in any darkness, if I believe that it is by opening my heart and soul that I will know the oneness of Source that is my true identity, then I must, in the outer, practice letting go. And so some of you have been supporting me in prayer around my mother's current twilight years, and I'm happy to report that she was able to meet the prerequisites for temporary respite care, which included a current negative test for stuff. And so she's cleared to be admitted on Monday morning at 10:30. And those of you who are getting to know me really well won't be surprised that in order to mark that very sincerely and as a way of honoring one of her requests, which she whispered to me only, could we have a dinner with all the family here before I go on Monday? I managed to let go of organizational principles, preparation, perfection. Oh my gosh, you recognize those? Some of you recognize that those are some of my soul's growth edge. Being prepared, being organized, and trying to make sure it's perfect. I thought I should practice what I'm preaching today, and so I organized a party this morning around 7 o'clock this morning to take place this afternoon. So even though I didn't skip my talk today, with any luck, it'll be a shorter talk for all of us. And so let me just say, my beloved, beloved community, that when we let go, it is really a process of removing blocks to our soul. That's really what it's about. I guess my talk could end here, but it won't. I have another example of a pattern of mine that I have used as grist for the mill with great success. So I invite you to do the same, to identify what is keeping your soul blocked to your own awareness of being one with all that is. Be willing, be brave, be courageous. Just take 100% responsibility for what is blocking your soul. Know that one of the biggest things we mess up on in daily life is that unity principle of God's omniscience, omnipresence, and power, which is the power of the month of May that we focus on. That omniscience, that omnipotence, and that omni knowledge, everything is available to us, but we get confused and think it comes from our small self, and it can only come from where God resides in the soul, which is why it is so important to remove blocks to the soul. And so now I will share with you the primary blocks that I have noticed show up to block my soul awareness, to get in the way of my meditating into the night, to sometimes prevent my heart from being honored, and ultimately my forgetting that the sanctity, that which is sacred about all of life, is contained in my soul. And it needs to open up to what is always there, which is that oneness, to what is always available, except when I forget or when those blocks become louder and more important than my remembering. So here we go. First block is judgment. Recognize that one? Oh my God. Second by second sometimes. Judgments of myself, judgments of others. Unforgiveness is a form of judgment because somewhere my small self has decided in judging self or other that there is what I have decided in my intellect or in my small self is the right, perfect, or only way to do something. We measure our success, I believe, in the degree to which we have shone our light to others and been a light on their path. When the various 8 or 10 members of my family who will be at the lunch got the invitation, all their stuff came up, every single one of them. And it was such a source of soul gratification. And I felt like a first grader who got a sticker, like go to grade 2, because my daughter said immediately, and she lives 4 hours away, so I knew they would need time. She said, oh yeah, we'll be there. Can we bring dessert? I am not going to tell you about all of the other reactions, because what matters is that I took responsibility for my letting go of the food, which is a huge value in our family, that giving people lots of notice because we have been wound up so tight about punctuation. I love that, about punctuality. So you can hear all these pieces that by my saying, I honor my sacred soul today, and I am asking the omnipotence, the omniscience, and the omnipresence in me to open up, so that is what is guiding me and not any of the past patterns of limited beliefs, sacred cows, velcroing myself to old judgments. So before I leave judgments, I just want you to feel assured that if you notice judgments coming up, sometimes minute by minute, second by second, either about yourself or another, you are not alone. We know in unity, the first step in healing is awareness. So the fact that I can share with you that oftentimes judging self or judging others happens in a nanosecond. And it doesn't matter as long as I remember that in that judgment, there is always some kind of crucifixion, unforgiveness, expectation, and those are just my patterns. One of the very first workshops I ever went to in Unity, and I don't remember if it was in the early 90s, very typical kind of radical format. The minister walked in with a bag of those, those bracelets. I don't know if you can still get them. And if stores were open in Canada, knowing me, I would have gone looking. But there are those bracelets that are comprised of a bunch of little candies, and then kids would bite one off at a time. And so she gave us that at the beginning of the presentation. And I don't remember if she was talking about unforgiveness or something, but I always took that candy bracelet as my image for how long it would take me to eat all the candies if I ate one every time I had a judgment. And so if part of your learning is visual or tactile, feel free to pick up one of those because I'm going to be looking for them too. I'll tell you why, because at the time I think my whole bracelet was probably empty within about, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. So I'm hoping that I might have moved in that number of years to maybe 11 minutes before the bracelet is empty. The point is, we decide to accept full responsibility for those judgments. The point is, we have awareness that those judgments, perhaps more than anything else, are the blocks to our souls. So ask yourself this morning, as I've been asking myself all week, am I willing to let judging go? Especially if I'm judging myself in any way, because how can that be love? When I open up to my soul, when I consider my soul sacred, I can feel the love, the oneness that has never judged me, but like the clouds on a cloudy day are just awaiting the removal of those blocks so that can shine forth as the truth of me. So judgments are the first blocks for me to the eminence or the fullness of my soul, informing me through its omnipresence, its omniscience, and its omnipotence. Try it. Try it. Ask yourself, what am I listening to in this moment? I can't walk across the room without the power of God. That's the truth. And so to ask for that omniscience, that omnipotence, and that omnipresence to be flooding my soul is to acknowledge that I am one with God in my soul. Okay, so that would really be the second block, folks. I didn't realize it till it came out. So the first block to my oneness and my living from a oneness with God is judgments. Judgments can be unforgiveness. Judgments can be all kinds of old patterns, old beliefs that we can decide in a twinkling of an eye we want to be done with. This might sound rather simple, because it did to me, and I shared some of you that I communicate with regularly. I shared this with you a couple weeks ago, that after all this work on forgiveness that we do, what came to me was that the shortest route to complete forgiveness for me is to be able to say, you know what? If I were that person, I'd be thinking and doing that too, likely. Guess what? Free, gone, done, unvelcroed, launched. I let them be them, as I've said to my family now for about a year. How about you do you and I do me? And recognizing that if I were that person that I'm judging through my small self, not through my soul, I'd be doing exactly what they're doing, because I'd be thinking what they are. So the first block, unforgiveness, judgment. Second block, remember I said a couple of minutes ago that access to my soul is blocked whenever I get confused about the omniscience, the omnipresence, and the omnipotence. This is an easy block to remove, especially when I meditate into the night. I recognize where that omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence is. And if I think it's coming from my small self, all I have to do, like a switch, is go, oh, right, I got confused again. Those three aspects of omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipower are the aspects of God in my soul, waiting for me to remove the blocks so that I can hear that oneness. And the last one is really the one that I have the most growth in still. And it's what I call hooks. What can hook me? What can still hook me? And interestingly enough, for a person who spent half a lifetime teaching English, these hooks for me fall into three categories: people, places, or things. I don't know how many of you had to learn grammar every single year for at least 13 years. But in Canada, grammar used to be the backbone of studying language. And you recognize that persons, places, or things is a definition of nouns. So isn't it wonderful that for me, most of my hooks are just nouns? Just nouns. People, places, things. This is where the scriptures I gave you at the beginning of the talk, and the talk is almost ending. The scriptures I gave you at the beginning of the talk have been my practical way to let go of those hooks. People, places, things. And I'll tell you in my conclusion right now about a big hook that hooked me again last week, but for a much shorter period of time. When my youngest daughter, who was raised in separate custody agreement with my former spouse, the youngest child stayed with me. And so really, I was both mom and dad for her for about 20 years, maybe longer, maybe closer to 25. Anyway, who cares? Time does not exist. Anyway, when she got engaged a year and a half ago, wow, did a pattern of mine that I didn't even know was still wound up so tight show up. I said to her, do you know what? I support you. I love you. I accept whatever you do for your wedding, except if your dad walks you down the aisle. Whoa, whoa. Control, rigidity, hooked. And guess what? In that one hook, there was a people, a place, and a thing. There were also a lot of judgments. Well, she said, because she's my teacher and a much older soul than her mother, she immediately rose to the occasion and said, Mom, would it be okay if you walked down together? I said, sure. Then last week, a lot of stuff. A wedding is a crisis ritual. Remember that from last Sunday? Rituals, traditions. So right on time, just a couple months before the wedding, the groom's family has completely blown up. They're in a cluster. They're in a thing. And that's what it took. The contrast of when I used to live there to be able to say, do you know what, sweetheart? I'm letting go of walking you down the aisle. What does that have to do with the richness of our experience? And letting go is that easy when we make up our minds. And so let us bring this morning's message to a close by recognizing that letting go is a choice, by recognizing that the reverence, the sanctity of the soul is awaiting us. It's waiting for us to remove the blocks of judgment, unforgiveness, the hooks, and the confusing, all the confusing that we do about where the omnipresence, the omnipower, and the omni-knowledge really come from. They're waiting for us in our soul. They're waiting.